Arc 5, Stars that Engrave History. Chapter 66, The Stage of Liliana Masquerade. Liliana, gah. What a disaster. This fire is way too hot. Way too hot. 7 times hotter than normal fire. Being burnt by this will mean dying with 7 times the agony. The white wall of flame erected before my eyes. Since it was a flame that would not burn if touched, but seemingly only miraculously give heat waves, in truth being able to withstand the pain would mean that it was not impossible to breach. Thus, in order to keep the truth hidden from everyone who were too scared to rush forth, with desperation I pretended to be someone who suffered from having been suffered a fire blast, which meant I conveyed everyone surrounding the waterway of the dangers of the flame. Well, even with everyone's mental state being a tad risky, it seemed that instinct had left them with the notion that the flames were dangerous. So my desperate act was perhaps not of much use, but even so not performing it was something I couldn't justify. Liliana, although it was easy for Priscilla-sama to say to sing and dance to snatch the people's spirits back. In all honesty, taking snatching spirits back Raya as a mood to sing with would entirely serve as an obstacle, and from its basis goes against the principle of song. As a result of frantic singing, to say that something airy was left within the hearts of those who listened was a natural intent of the heavens. And to feel something in that intent of the heavens, and giving a tip because of that would be such a gentle world. To begin with the attitude of wanting to earn a tip, in that case such a desire would make its way into the song. But a song with such a desire contained within was not what I wanted. And so couldn't this plan be said to be a losing battle from the very start? Liliana, recalling back, although this life was short-lived, but days filled with tumultuousness had been experienced. Father-sama and Mother-sama, although there had been resentment when being casted off into the cruel world at 13 after declaring independence, but now remaining is only gratefulness that I was born so cute. Although I have all along been quite the unfilial daughter, the gratitude and wrath I felt toward the two of you, respectful, was something integral to my every way. Goo. Hafathought, a never-ending summer. While speaking of gratitude toward parents and various other whims, I felt as if those on the opposite the wall of flame were about to approach and once more put on an act of overheating. Really hoping you'll react appropriately, you bunch who can't read the atmosphere. But, no matter how realistic my performance was, it would fall through sooner or later. And then if it were exposed, there would be no way to continue suppressing Priscilla-sama's extreme endurance tactics. And there we go, it's done. It's over. Serious, oh my, do you have the leisure to see? That the child who you have expectations of, is wearing an expression as if there is no path forward. I can with clarity feel the sorrow and exhaustion plaguing that child's spirit. Aching back and forth, isn't it rather pitiful? Priscilla, not in the slightest. Without regard to the me who had begun to clutch my head and count down the seconds to the end, in the center of the courtyard surrounded by waterways that had been set alight, an exchange of dialogue between Priscilla-sama and that freak Sirius was in progress. That said, the dialogue was entirely composed of Priscilla-sama mercilessly striking Sirius's steady tone with a deaf ear. And setting aside Sirius's manner of speech for now, that figure that rotated chains with both arms could not be called steady in the slightest. Air being slashed, atmosphere being sliced, the path of metal chains being swung through the air meandered freely. Tumbling, prancing, front back left right it struck toward Priscilla-sama, as if a metal snake. The extending and retracting chain made an ear-piercing level of sound, continuous to the point that it seemed to me Priscilla-sama had been enclosed in a cage of iron. To the point of becoming a prison. The stone steps that took direct hits from the chain exploded mercilessly, caved in, the pairing speaking volumes of that power. If direct contact with the skin were made, the result would be unsightliness caused as if by a snake's fangs and tongue. If the recipient were someone like Priscilla-sama whose skin was white and delicate, to call the torment the most extreme would not be enough. But, Priscilla-sama in fact ferociously attacked that metal chain. Priscilla, tumultuous and yet tasteless noise, heedlessly exerting every which way without the slightest trace of release, a base weapon from which even a hint of elegance cannot be felt, superficial and yet unseemly idle talk. How truly fortunate that such a number of measures to diminish mine anger were prepared that mercy may be shown. Toward this profanity, there in fact remains only admiration. Liliana, Priscilla-sama is awesome. Priscilla-sama yet wore an expression which spoke of listlessness, waving the young blade to welcome the chain that forced its way close from every direction. Forget front up downside, how could a blow from somewhere unseen like the back possibly be intercepted? In addition, perhaps this power was unique to the young blade, but whenever the young blade deflected the chain, the point of contact would be scorched white, with firepower that seemed not negligible, and yet the chain would burn and become gradually shorter and shorter. If this were repeated, the chain would certainly lose its volume. Liliana, hey. Priscilla-sama, please be rid of it. Priscilla, regard thus, 'tis what is known as candid thoughts which forget to cover eyes. Although exposure of this level for a commoner is presumably difficult, it certainly inspires more pleasure than boring theory which ceaselessly contorts. Well, although merely one person in this world would be enough. Liliana, just now was a praise for me, a praise, right? To consider that praise would be fine, right? I'm about to feel happy, you know. Amazing, truly amazing. Yay. Even if I were to be told that hadn't been praise, I'd already felt happy, so it was too late. Accepting my support, Priscilla-sama also accordingly raised her dignity. She continued to advance, ceaselessly burning the chain away. The imposing atmosphere seemed to overwhelm even the Sin Archbishop freak, and was now entirely just waiting. Was a yam on the oven. Liliana, no, wait a second, Priscilla can't solve this so effortlessly. If it's done like this, we're also be off to effortlessly. Priscilla, that's indeed the case. Too fun a time was being had. How dangerous. If just now I hadn't stopped her, that person would have been off so effortlessly. The overwhelmed Sirius took this chance of Priscilla-sama stopping to leap far backward. Perhaps it was better to say, although Priscilla-sama's non-compliant attitude was rather difficult, but the opponent who could match her was fortunately none other than a Sin Archbishop. Perhaps it should be asked whether or not humans could move in such a way. Sirius, mouth clearly having been worked so hard, and yet a master so stubbornly refusing to open their heart is rare indeed. For what reason is your soul so tightly closed? After gaining some distance, Sirius flickered her gaze to her two arms as she spoke thus. That chain had already been shorn completely short, but as the freak spoke she rotated her wrists to restore its length. It seemed that many chains were wound firmly on her arms, whether or not they were cutting off circulation was unknown. Sirius, all hearts regardless of whose have a space. To live means to have feelings, yet no matter the color of the feeling that peeks out from there, it's something every person has, even to say a feeling you've staunchly bore all along, as long as it's revealed it can be understood. Priscilla. Sirius, you too have a soul that can anguish, feelings that disorient, although unwaveringly keeping weaknesses hidden from others is a condition to living strongly, but that is not merely a destination to reach on one's lonesome. What one person can achieve on their lonesome has a limit. After becoming one with other people, there are occurrences that can be discovered for the first time. In order to allow other people to see that place, mutual understanding and shared feelings are necessary. Sirius swayed her body, saying thus to the silent Priscilla-sama. That voice was as if wanting bleed into the soul. That attitude was dear as if flesh and bone. That manner was tender as if dissolving the guards of others. The content of those words was as if enticing others. Clearly as if a sweet poison melting with languor, yet even my extremities felt numb. Sirius, could you allow me to help you reach understanding with others? Truly your love is so deep, and loving of the world. Looking forward to being able to be loved. I can understand this. And hope that those other than me can come to understand. In order to keep you from spending a lonely night on your lonesome. Priscilla, truly ashamed to rely only on delusion and conjecture and prattle on without rest. If no doubts are held toward your own words, you are precisely what is known as a lunatic. Sirius, oh my, thank you very much. That is a title commensurate with my husband's. A criminal who cannot comprehend in the slightest how outstanding that person is, toward that person spits wild words of admiration, envy, jealousy. Priscilla, not worth a mention. What belongs to mine self belongs to mine self. The narrative-like manner of your soliloquy are the wild words. For people like you, even the surface of mine enigma cannot be skimmed. Priscilla-sama with self-assurance rejected that sweet enticing proposal with clarity. However, in terms of self-assurance Sirius did not lose. The freak's head tilted as if having expected Priscilla-sama's rejection. Sirius, to say that even the surface cannot be skimmed, this is the epitome of stubbornness, isn't it? In that case, how does such insignificance sound? Iris and the King of Thorns. Priscilla. Sirius, or perhaps, the Rose Knight of Tyros. Maglitza's guillotine. I didn't understand the significance of Sirius's words. Same with the intent behind the freak saying such words. However, it prompted an immediate effect. Priscilla, better off dead. As I thought I'd heard a low murmur, Priscilla-sama's figure vanished from sight. As I expressed my confusion, the distance that had once existed between Priscilla-sama and Sirius became zero. Priscilla-sama swung the yang blade from above, arc mercilessly tracing toward Sirius's neck. In an instant the world slowed to an extent that yielded incredulousness, and even I was able to see the path that Priscilla-sama's blade followed. Just aiming it would be as if caressing Sirius's slender neck. If that were to happen, my neck, and the necks of everyone nearby would break in the same way. Could it be that it was because I understood this that it seemed to happen so slowly? Say, if a life-threatening danger were to approach, humans would, with an intense focus, slow their perception of the world down. Although, even with that, when the celestial scales of my own life were being tilted by others, what could I and the many people around me do about it? The crimson radiance of the yang blade, just like that with imposing manner which sliced through the atmosphere. Liliana. Due to being unable to understand the sight before me, I couldn't help but let out the voice of a dazed fool. The neck of I who had made that noise was still firmly anchored upon this small body. That was a matter of course. My neck had not been severed. Whether my own or Sirius's. In substitution, Priscilla-sama's body, which should have leapt at Sirius, was flung backward forcefully. Enduring Sirius's metal chains from the front, whose attack had served as a welcome, in a dangerous manner was flung backward. Liliana, Priscilla-sama. I let out a cry toward that figure which had obviously not leapt of its own will. If Priscilla-sama were to be killed, the situation would become an irreparable wreck. I could scarcely even think of such a notion, crying out solely because a sense of disaster dawned. And yet, Priscilla-sama from midair suddenly spun back, halting the impact by stabbing the young blade into the cobblestones. Priscilla, cease the racket, the true damage is yet to come. Replying thus to my wail, with a resounding step Priscilla-sama landed. However, immediately following that, Priscilla-sama's necklace began to change. It had originally been a necklace with 3 jewels of green, but one of the jewels had disintegrated into ash. Almost as if taking Priscilla-sama's stead in the attack from just before. Priscilla, the repayment of my necklace has a rather high cost, you know. Sirius, so that's how it is. Is it that wounds you suffer transfer onto what is valuable to you? That is truly a manner befitting of pride. No, couldn't possibly be. Priscilla, a deliberately demeaning speculation, is malicious to the extreme. A crime of ludicrosity reaching this extent cannot be redeemed with even 10,000 deaths. The manner of your death is best fitting as a scorching heat that burns and burns yet never dies out. Towards Sirius, whose manner of accordance had not wavered in the slightest, Priscilla-sama's rage shone. Rather than to say that the young blade in her hand had increased its radiance, perhaps it should be said that the heat was increasing? Priscilla-sama's regal attire, even to me, appeared as if it swayed under the sweltering sunny day. Though gazing at it, there truly was no way to think that Priscilla-sama could stand at a disadvantage, but there was also that incomprehensible happening from just now. Sirius, with her inexplicable words, appeared as if meant to taunt Priscilla-sama. Although Priscilla-sama had seemed to rush forward as if falling for that provocation, since that movement had been so predictable it had been welcomed from the front, was not the case. Rather, this was the opinion of an outsider like me. In my regard, Priscilla-sama's movements had appeared fast to the point of disappearing from sight, but perhaps to Sirius this was not the case. Although this possibility could not be denied, but that shouldn't have been. Because when the young blade had struck out, Priscilla-sama's movements had stopped. Appearing as if suspended, although such words did exist to convey the general idea, but this was on a different level of meaning from that. More precisely, it was as if it had been completely frozen. Freezing in such an unnatural position, I did not assume to be Priscilla-sama's desire, nor that humans could consciously do as such. In that case, that stopping should have been connected to some kind of incomprehensible ability, but what could it have been? Sirius, please do not rage like that. Although you appear as if constantly raising your temper over something, but such a thing yields exhaustion, and will only parch the soul? Something like wrath is the tomb of the feeling that should be most shunned in this world. If that's the case, constantly welling in the heart should be feelings of ecstasy and joy. Liliana, see, clearly holding such a philosophy, everyone outside doesn't look very happy, do they? Sirius, Ha! Just now, could it be a voice had been audible? The freak Sirius looked directly at me, eyes that were visible from a gap in the bandages coiling tightly around my body. What a disaster to have done to myself. Sirius, indeed, within the hearts of everyone who is outside, unease and lament reigns. Although this too is something tragic, this is merely the result of human hearts overflowing with tenderness and compassion. Liliana, what are you saying? Sirius, once within my sphere of influence, people become capable of opening their hearts to one another and resonating. And so, feelings that cannot be condensed into words can come to light. To be human is to be able to empathize, a precious existence from which feelings can come to be. If tender love is felt for the hearts of others, when sorrow is witnessed, in one's own heart sorrow will also bloom. And sorrow will also sprout in the hearts of those who witness that sorrow. As the cycle repeats, the drops of sorrow will become a pond, become a lake, become a river. This person began to speak of such heavy things. This was to say, the more people gathered, to be by this person's side would yield increasingly disastrous results. Such a thing which could rile up and spread suffering to everyone in the city, and it didn't stop at creating unrest. This person referred to it as a connection of the heart. Priscilla, if this seems a tragedy, by all means take the lead in saving everyone. Choosing not to do so and only sighing is but an irritating noise for the commoners, you know. Sirius, I can understand those words. I'm merely a victim of a one-sided attack on my helplessness. However, I possess a means to save all those enveloped by sorrow. Sirius clapped her palms together with a demeanor of going as far as to declare what a wonderful idea. Although it was doubtful that the freak's notion of a good idea could make the situation take a turn for the better, but neither I nor Priscilla-sama spoke up. Although I didn't know about Priscilla-sama, rage boiled in my heart. A feeling that could not be described with words surging within my chest was igniting. Serious, a means to offer salvation to all those enveloped in sorrow, is to use delight, use joy to sweep away that sorrow. Which is to say that the I who is to be a conduit for such salvation must find happiness. Serious, my. Within this city is the husband whom I've been separated with for quite some time. To confirm that love with my husband, with that person, to have it returned. A happily married couple is the emblem of happiness. If my heart is filled to the brim with such joy, all those who cry out and lament will be saved. By mutually enjoying happiness, the hearts of everyone will be saved. Serious spoke her discourse. Priscilla-sama wore a completely disinterested expression, and I who flickered glances at her was thinking of a great number of things. I could understand that this was the one time when I could not escape reality by wearing a pretense of a disconnect in understanding. Or rather, it could be said, I understood. Thoroughly and completely understood the fact that this freak Sirius Romani Conti was our enemy. I raised my head, gazed across the surrounding waterways engulfed in flame. On the other side of the white-tinged wall of flame were the figures of people who stood in place without a means to cross the waterway. They had all fallen under a charm of feelings, lost their awareness of self. I could hear the sound of their corpse-like voices. Thanks to my peculiar ears, which as a bard, only sound and hearing were my specialties, to me those voices seemed to echo without cease. So terrifying, so sorrowful, save me, how painful, why, don't. Resentment swept up as if in a vortex, wails drawn out as if for eternity. I could hear those kinds of voices. Was this to be the result of that so-called empathy then? Was this to be the result of that so-called becoming one then? That so-called unity, was it something like this? Liliana, have to free. To become one, and to have everything of everything become identical couldn't be the same. Men, women, adults, children, infants, elderly, humans, beastkin alike, were clearly all different. To condense all that together, whisk into disarray, and call it like this everyone will understand each other, and become one such words, were certainly no joke. No joke at all. Priscilla, no need for you to be happy. Shut that pettily clever mouth of yours while you can, and die on your lonesome. Serious, don't. Don't insist on using the loneliness of disconnect to comfort yourself. If you are one who cannot recognize the form of happiness, taking a look at my happiness and giving it a chance isn't so bad, is it? Or perhaps if you understand the joy of connecting with the one in your heart, then you'll come to understand the joy of being a bride, isn't that so? Priscilla, unfortunately, mineself has already walked the aisle 7 times. And each was nowhere approaching something like happiness. Apply not your paltry standards to minself, 'tis nauseating. Serious, 7 times, he. Priscilla-sama treated Sirius's words as a jest, and brought the young blade down from above. However, Sirius also commenced her own ferocious attack with chains of steel. Sparks ignited and scattered, the severed chain flew away, and the figures of the two were pushed away from the center of the courtyard by the clash. Cleft in two, the chain. Tinged with white, the inextinguishable flame. In a state of being unable to give voice, the people who wailed in agony. Within me, slowly it came together. Could it be accomplished? If the theorized situation was indeed reality, was correct, in that case, it shouldn't be unachievable. Serious, even though I've clearly expended so much time on this for only the sake of that reaching the heart of that one person, you had 7 chances, and wasted all of them. Priscilla, don't pin the blame for your own lack of allure on mineself. In this situation, even that pitiful man who has been imprinted on by you, would refuse to meet you. Serious, I am intimately connected with that person, and thus are deeply in love. This was fury that inspired a jolt of terror. Immediately after, bisecting the courtyard was a snake of flame which burned red. In the instant that Priscilla-sama blocked chains striking from Sirius's arms, the flames followed the chains to race up Sirius's arms, and the surging flame swallowed Priscilla-sama's body. The snake of flame reared open its maw, consuming Priscilla-sama's slim body headfirst. Without a means to counter that fiery tactic, Priscilla-sama was swallowed, and tossed outside of the courtyard now seeped with flame. Just as she was about to plummet, she suddenly breathtakingly stabilized herself with her sword. And yet, after being submerged in such flames, Priscilla-sama's body remained completely unhurt. But with a sound, the necklace's jewel once again shattered. The 2 clasps of the necklace came undone simultaneously, landing on the ground with a resounding noise. Serious, I share a deep love with that person. That just and sincere person just can't help that he hasn't yet finished what he began. To misconstrue that person's sincerity as pure love is just too obscene. Aya. How irritating. Priscilla-sama had once again survived at the cost of the necklace, but her demeanor toward facing Sirius had changed completely. The freak opened her mouth as if baring fangs, spitting ugly words as she violently expressed her temper. Her arms had swept up a vortex of red flame. Sirius, why is it that you so inconsiderately shake my heart to this degree? These violent shakes of the heart, another way of naming wrath, is passion. The trembles will give way to heat, scorching those who are sinners. Is this what you want for yourself as well, you pretentious lonely wench? Priscilla, with that mouth, with those eyes, such fabrication. The seething wrath was igniting herself, a vortex of flame building overhead the Sirius who was slowly raising her arms. What had struck just now emanated from her arms, a pair of slim twin snakes. And as those arms crossed, the forms merged into one powerful snake. The arm struck vertically downward, and the enormous snake of flame rushed at Priscilla-sama. Rather than evade it, Priscilla-sama took a stance of meeting the attack. The young blade flew from down to up, tip lodging in the head of that giant snake. With a sound that was not one of chain meeting sword, the snake missed its target by a wide arc. However, Priscilla-sama was sent flying by the impact and could not make a follow-up. After Sirius had summoned the snake in a fit of agitation, the flow of offense and defense had swerved sharply. Priscilla-sama had been forced on the defensive, and the metal chain and flame chased her retreating figure. Why was that? Although it was clear at a glance that Sirius's abilities couldn't be underestimated, but analyzing the fight would not point to Priscilla-sama being at a disadvantage. She had said that the young blade consumed mana quickly, but was it that which was pressing her so? Or could it be that perhaps, merely as a speculation? It wasn't that Priscilla-sama couldn't attack. Liliana, is it me? A quick end, not just for me but for everyone in the vicinity as well. In order to avoid such a result, was this a battle for buying time? Wait, no, hang on, how could it be that the arrogant Priscilla-sama, who thought the highest of only herself, would do something like that? You are to prepare your song. Should a shadow fall across the young sword, mine self will no matter what sever that abomination's head. Before that happens, then. At that time, something had shook in my brain. Right before the battlefield had truly opened, Priscilla-sama had told me. Before the young blade met its limit, I was to prepare a song. And she had added that if that time were to approach, Sirius's head would be mercilessly severed and everyone else along with her. But that was to say, before that time had arrived, to just wait for it indicated that there was more to it than was initially suspected. In that case, Priscilla-sama was waiting. Waiting for me to ready a song. At the very least, to take responsibility for the time before those words. Liliana, go. M. How bothersome. That person, so damn bothersome. If there are feelings, just confess to the feelings already. That person, absolutely has feelings for me. No, because I had been told I was liked, it had definitely been said before. Oh, what a pain, screw this was terrifying, was there no other way? Liliana, Priscilla-sama. If the situation was as I suspected, then to be fighting at a bothersome disadvantage, she must have understood what I was thinking right now. I pointed toward the stone tower that had been ignited by Sirius's flames. Priscilla-sama turned her head at the sound of my voice, looked toward where I was pointing. HOH. She wore the terrifying expression with terrifying gaze, but with such a terrifying mien it inspired a feeling of reliability. She laughed. Too wicked, an expression which left it difficult to figure out just who the archbishop was here. Sirius, stop looking away. Priscilla, with the likes of you as an opponent, looking away is no distraction. Do not lecture mineself's actions. Priscilla-sama leapt back, while at the same time parrying an approaching chain with her sword. Her body gathering momentum with speed that seemed fast than one motion would allow, she landed by the burning tower. Priscilla-sama gazed up at the burning tower as she directed the tip of the young blade at its base. Priscilla, such an unsightly flame. Truly beautiful lights are dazzling like this. Differences in aesthetic between the lights of flame and such were incomprehensible to an outsider like me. Although incomprehensible, even in outsiders I could clearly make out, a decidedly different sort of flame now surrounded the control tower. The white-tinged flames that swayed there were of the same type that surrounded the waterways. Even though the snakes originating from Sirius's chains also burned crimson and scorched with a bright staggering heat, the flames emitted from the young blade held a sort of sanctity that gave the impression of being untouchable. Priscilla, the stage is prepared. Ensure that you perform your utmost. Liliana, right. Understood. After smothering the burning control tower with another layer of flame, Priscilla-sama spoke one sentence. I replied with fervent confidence, rushing over to the control tower. With an air of being set off by anything that happened, Sirius, who flickered her gaze toward the scene, extended both her hands in our direction. Sirius, the hell are you doing to the flame that I lit as an emblem of my love for that person? Liliana, something like setting an entire building on fire to flirt. I think it's best you don't say such outlandish, ridiculous things. I said it. Wahayaya. Rushing toward my back as I spoke while running, I felt that serious freak's chain descending in one smooth motion. Burning chains. A heat wave. In the instant of being attacked, I'd known from before the flame had been ignited that my head could be sent flying, but heedless of what was behind me I ran. And the reason is, Priscilla, whatever that one will come up with, this is a situation where mine self will not hold back until the very end. Liliana, Chiirii. As if taking the place of my fleeing self, Priscilla-sama landed where the chain would strike. The young blade sliced downward as if licking, deflecting the entire tongue of flame. Hearing the intermittent sounds of Priscilla-sama, and that freak clashing anew, I finally reached my destination of the burning tower of stone. Liliana, ha. Although the distance covered hadn't been too long, drawing breath grew laborious, and my body felt fatigued. In all honesty, right now nothing would feel better than a drink of ice water before collapsing on a bed. Although this was something not meant for a traveling bard, but after spending so long in greenhouse-like surroundings, anything but a soft bed wouldn't work. Liliana, really, isn't this all Kiritaka-san and everyone else's fault? Allowing me to reside in this city, offering me warm hospitality besides. Whether the White Dragon Scales or the citizens of the city all expressed their love, and the likes of Kiritaka-san with such enthusiasm that even I was taken aback, it was all their fault. The fault of remaining in this city, that my ability to stay on the path of a traveling bard had been dispelled. Well then, just a bit of extra effort here. Recall the ruthless determination of your waist and legs from before. Liliana, I. Epiphany realized, teeth clenched, I held my steady Luliar in my arms and rushed toward the flaming tower. So hot, so damn hot. Anticipation of the scorching pain sent a sharp jolt through me. However, although clearly enduring an overwhelming heat wave, between skin and hair and Luliar, none of them had been burnt by the scorching flame. Although the heat of the flame could be clearly felt, nothing had caught fire. As with the flames over the waterways, there was painful heat but no burning. And thus I recognized this flame as the young blade's fake. However, it was different. Different indeed. The young blade wielded by Priscilla-sama had indeed burnt through the metal chains. A sword clearly using the same flames, but burning only select things. Priscilla-sama's flame could choose what to burn. Which meant that it could also choose what not to burn. Liliana. Well then. The white flame enveloping this control tower would definitely not burn me. Even though it was so hot as to be disintegrating, so agonizing as to seem fatal, a pain that made whoever experienced it want to collapse and roll on the ground, it would not burn, it would not injure, it would not be deadly. Eyeballs melting, tongue withering, hair alight, skin festering, Luliar scorched, bones cracking, flesh burnt, consciousness eroding to nothing, was all an illusion. Not hot, not hot, so hot, craving death, not wanting to die, so hot, not hot, Hatha thought even though it was so hot. Sprinting up the stairs of the control tower, first floor, second floor, just how many floors were there? Where was the roof? The fire crept outward and extended its reach, looking left and right yielded only the sight of white fire, so hot, how could such agony be, so hot, heat beyond heat, I wanted to wail about the intensity of the heat, wanted to shriek until my throat split right this instant. Absolutely not. If this agony were given voice to, it would desecrate my throat in one cry. This throat could absolutely not be spent. These fingers as well. Wanting to scratch, want to express the suffering no matter how. But no, absolutely not, if these fingers were to be spent, they could not strum a melody. Whether eyes or skin or hair, if they melted, it couldn't be helped. But not this throat, not these fingers, and these ears as well, were not allowed, because they were all indispensable for what would come next. Forcefully ascending the steps, slamming open the incredibly heavy door with a kick, appearing now was the night sky, the wind howling in frenzy, heat continuing to flow from beneath my feet, but there were no more walls, and sprinting to the highest point to glance down. The wind rose and fell, and below were a red figure and white figure waving dangerous objects, white flames surrounded by a wailing crowd. Although I was so hot, I felt as if I would die at any instant. Right now, the heat had not completely fled, the soles of my feet were still burning, and the white flames swaying in the wind were still slowly intensifying. Sorrow suddenly rose in my heart, and tears threatened to flow. Liliana, eep, alright, this is a once-in-a-lifetime stage. Reaching the place I had dashed for even through heat and agony that inspired a craving for death, from here everything was visible, sound could be heard from everywhere. Even feeling drained to a deathly point, before I died there was still something left to do, and so. Liliana, come, gather around, everyone far away make sure you listen. Everyone close by make sure you watch the dance. For everyone even farther away, I'll be even louder so just listen. Liliana Masquerade is here to sing dance perform for you. So listen well. Sky transcending the light of dawn. Just gather all those scorching feelings and spit them all out at once. Chapter 67, Liliana Masquerade. It turned out that Liliana did not remember the words she had wanted to sing. Liliana's bloodline, from the time of her mother's mother, and even mothers beyond that, was a bloodline which had all along not settled in one place and instead traveled the earth. The lifeless profession of a bard would of course inspire irritation. Not remaining in any one place, but along with the winds, along with the heart's whims, continuously traveling with only 2 feet. Amongst the bards, it seemed that many of them would gather together, band together for performances. However, Liliana was not particularly fond of this nature of banding together. Although not disliking of being with others, their interests were different. There was a palpable difference in sense of music. Just like her line of mothers, Liliana trod alone onto a journey. However, even amongst this group of bards with such variance in personality, this independence could not be denied to have appeared rather early with her. She had been 13 when she had left her parents' nest. Hey, little brat. How could you have such an idea? Wouldn't your parents agreeing with you be enough? Although not over a trivial matter, but fleeing without question as a result of the argument was she. Starting from her tens, Liliana had always wanted to live independently. Those were the two heedless opinions of a daughter too deeply submerged in chasing dreams, and her parents, and especially mother, forcibly kept her. At around the age of 10, the feelings of the young Liliana were already a tad more mature than those of other girls of her age. That was more or less the result of her father's performances, her mother's poems, and the intimate influence of her relatives. To the young Liliana, the characters appearing in the music her mother sang were dashing. Following how their adventures, struggles, battles, romances, intrigues interacted with her, Liliana was forever unable to bear that her feet could not make their way forward. The people that had been come to know through her own songs could clearly so freely choose their way of living. To the 10-year-old Liliana, the heroes that had appeared in the songs were friends. Walking the same path, seeing the same sights, underneath the same sky they raised their heads to see, she too wanted to savor the same taste. Clinging to such a feeling, in those 3 years, she could in fact bear it. Liliana burned up the single-minded passion and single-minded sense of companionship, and from her father stole the skill of performing with a lyre, from her mother stole the sound of that song and several famed songs. On the eve of turning 13, mother had personally given her the traditionally passed down lyre, and after the grandparent-child argument, she sprinted away from her parents' sides, journeying away from home alone. Ha 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 ha. Wait and see, old lady. I'll be the ruler of bards. Completely evading the pursuit of her parents, the her who had become alone made a vow to the night sky. Liliana Masquerade's grand adventure would from now on begin. Since the age of 10, her parents had deplored Liliana's recklessness. Complaining that her skills had yet to mature, that she treated not learning melodies as a joke, occasionally refusing her food afterward. Hey. A little girl like you thinking she can live independently is 10 years too early. An arrogant child like this, leave it to her to take care of the meat of the rabbits who've fallen into the trap. Oh my, you poor thing. How undercooked today's rabbit meat seems, but it's still being eaten. A child who doesn't listen to her parents really is pitiful. For better or for worse, parents with a nature of chasing their dreams. For a pair such as them, how heartrending the departure of their only daughter must be. Surely leading up to the departure, arguments would have been aplenty. This lowers the consumption of meals. 3 meals a day from now. If Liliana's gone, we'll just have another child. Surely, there must have been arguments. Surely it was painful. Indeed. And a parental argument was the last gift she received from them. If Liliana's dreams were crushed, to return to her parents was not what she would do. In order to cut off a way out for Liliana, they spoke such words. To weaken at the thought of an escape route was human nature. As long as there existed a way out, the flames of determination could not burn until the very last. Especially for a traveling bard who had no home of their own. Family and hometown were typically notions that were merged into one. Reliance on family was a subconsciously overwhelming tendency. The greatest obstacle standing in the way of independence was the act of cutting it off. Thanks to her youthful recklessness and her parents' shrewd manipulation, she had defeated such an obstacle. Liliana, sipping muddied water, munching roots of grass, overwhelmed by starvation and weakness, thought of returning. It was as she thought of this that she noticed their consideration. If her resolve had shattered then, perhaps she would have cast down her lyre. She thanked her parents. To part had been the best way. Years later, having encountered them in another town, they had yet to settle their differences. On top of that, held in her parents' arms was an unfamiliar infant. Liliana had initially assumed it to be her younger sister, but rather than speak to her parents, she merely stuck out her chest, straightened her back and returned the way she had come. Years later, if she had achievements more worthy of pride, perhaps a reunion with her parents could even be one of smiles and happy talks. However, the her of today was sorely lacking. So for now it should be left at that. Of course, after this meeting today perhaps she would never encounter her parents again. And there was an even higher chance that she would never be able to introduce herself as an elder sister to the little sister whose name she had yet to learn. However, this was what Liliana had chosen, a way of life which relied on song. In coming days, when Liliana had become a world-renowned bard, doubtlessly her parents would irresponsibly comment to everyone who would listen. The first to fall victim would no doubt be her little sister. And thus, to gain another petty ambition was completely natural. What a heart-pounding vision of a future! Which shouldn't have been too much to ask for. When Liliana was 17, she found her resolve anew. Liliana, who was now 22, had lived independently for 9 years. It was a given that it was an atypical life, riddled with tribulation. Most notably was at the age of 13, right after she'd begun her journey, when her declaration of intent to be the master of bards had been trampled upon the following day. If she hadn't been picked up by passerby merchants, and as a maiden hadn't needed to negotiate, surely she would actually have pitifully died alone. It had been a group of merchants, traveling across the lands to make their living. Liliana had been picked up and taken care of, acting as a serving girl. It was a way of travel much safer, much more comfortable, than a true journey alone, as long as there would be meals and a bed. Reaching cities, Liliana would also take up the lyre, singing at the side of the road for coin. Having left her parents, the first instance of having her performance recognized was unforgettable. The merchants took care of her for around a year, but when their spokesperson settled in a town, acquiring his own store, the group disbanded. Amongst the scattered merchants, several groups invited Liliana to come along, but solemnly she declined, continuing on alone. Letting go of a safer and more comfortable journey, renewing herself as a person. The lukewarm days of the beginning had ended, and Liliana Masquerade's tale began. This was without question a tale of such vigor. Afterward, several years of toil were committed. As part of a group of merchants, or a respected house of bards, and forget that she carried a sign with her, the ruthless world had no consideration for a little girl separated from her family of musicians. It had been then that she fully understood the consideration had shown before she left. This was when Liliana had realized there was another great truth of this world. It was that the world she lived in and the worlds the characters of her beloved stories lived in were absolutely different, and she was in no way one of their companions. A beginning was hardly anything so unique. As always, she munched on roots of grass, consumed red fruits that she could not find in the mountains, and on her lonesome suffered the agony of a stomach ache and fever, and on that night, she realized. The heroes of the thrilling stories she knew shouldn't have been like this. Because those tales were done and over with. The everydays where they spat fresh blood, spoke their aspirations, cried out their hopes, and swung their blades were of the distant past. Liliana tread through their footsteps, wove their tales for others to witness. Only did merely that. Liliana loved them, but they had never loved Liliana. Her own thoughts had been completely one-sided, and were in fact akin to something which had stumbled into an old dead and lost their way. Then, just who was a bard? To become the master of bards, saying so, Liliana had taken up the mantle of bard for many a year, before finally realizing how useless she was. For 3 days and 3 nights, Liliana's pains, fever, and vomiting continued without cease. As she lowered her head, Liliana wondered whether this was a cruel dream or reality. After the 4th day, Liliana awoke recovered, splashed her face in the stream, drank its water. The self reflected there wore a different mien than the self of before. Wind rustling the foliage, refreshing calls of insects and birds flowed across the stream. And there she had felt the song for the first time. Tears seeping out, Liliana couldn't help but leap into the stream. The insects, birds, fish were all startled, their music flowing to the water's surface, where Liliana's head emerged, laughing heartily. She cried, laughed, cried out. Liliana descended the mountain, body caked in dried mud and dirted water, and stood on the streets. Everyone found themselves disgusted by the young girl clutching an instrument, wearing a dirted dress. The store owner's expression revealed disgust, and passers-by on the streets seemed uneasy as well. Merely standing like that for a few seconds would perhaps result in being knocked over by some thoughtless passerby. However, the Liliana standing upon the streets moved with agility. It wasn't that she was thinking she'd be knocked over if she didn't start soon. In this moment, she desired only to sing as soon as she could. As the lyre was plucked, a handful of people noticed. A dirty muddy girl, the aged and withered lyre in her hands, the hands that were touching the lyre had become breathtaking. It was a question how many people had recognized it. If something were truly happening, surely the people who noticed would have left immediately. Liliana's performance began, and in the instant that those graceful charming hands wove music, the footsteps of everyone on the streets paused, as did their breathing. In an instant, everyone realized there had been some sort of vital shift, awaiting a tremendous wave to sweep through their hearts. The source of the sound stood upon the street, a dirted young girl, every gaze focused upon her. Liliana felt the weight of gazes upon her, and at the same time understood her elevated self. The stage had been prepared, and she dashed on it in one breath. As applause for her performance reached its zenith, Liliana's song began. Song flowed from her throat, to the extent of making everyone believe that the songs they had sung in the past was of the same substance. Their own knowledge, thoughts of famous melodies wavered back and forth, piercing. The pair who had lived for each other, friends who had thought themselves inseparable, with a clear heart watched them rise toward the sky. Song was a gift, and to the friends of the past whose tales she sang of, she was nothing at all. Liliana understood such that her own existence was one of a bard. With this foundation of understanding, from hereafter she could continue to sing by herself. Flaunt that in this world such exemplary people existed. With such exemplary people, who she had once thought of as friends, flaunt that they had been amiable. Certainly there would come a day when amazing people would be befriended, and to be friends with such amazing people, to proudly do something like this. Finishing her song, Liliana shed tears. The people, struck speechless, shed tears just as she did, wiping their noses. Applause echoing like thunder across the street, Liliana Masquerade became a bard. Since then, Liliana's acquaintanceship with music had persisted. Atop the burning control lower, Liliana recalled the first time she'd sung, the first time she had sung along, the first time she had sung as a bard. A feeling similar to the one from then danced in her heart. What she wanted to sing, wanted to express with words, wanted to voice, was too much. Equally so when in the midst of song. To the point that it could be called an obsession. Choosing to burn to the end, still burning even now without heat of circumstance. Perhaps Liliana did not feel the scorching heat, but the consuming heat yet tormented her. Even now, consuming heat agonized her back, body, that had scaled the control tower wreathed in flame, continually letting out cries of pain. A pain that drove her to her knees, ached until she wanted to cry out immediately. However, something like wailing was just too unseemly. Before her eyes was an audience who wanted a song. This throat was not for crying. The song that emerged was not one that had been passed down by her mother or family. A bard's obligation was an obligation to inherit stories, and perhaps for a bard this was a misstep, but this was the song that Liliana had received, as a gift when she had first come to understand the world. When the next dawn arrived, the sky would be dyed red. Chasing off the night was that morning sky that Liliana loved to see. The break of day stained red and yellow, bringing a true morning to all. A sky which surpassed dawn. No matter what the night held, morning would always dawn. A blue sky transcending dawn was the start of a new day. Right now, mayhem gradually permeated the city, and a great number of people had been overtaken by unease and sorrow, leaving them immobile. In the midst of a night where neither looking forward nor backward was an option, every single one of them was struggling was the reality. But Liliana wanted to sing, even so. Because she wanted to sing, she wanted to sing. She herself would not survive the agony of holding back her song when she wanted to sing. And thus, right now was the perfect time to use song to convey what she wanted to. Liliana loosened the trembling throat that had been carefully tightened and continued to sing. Fingers moving across the lute lyre as if in dance, in truth, she sang simultaneously as she danced. Atop the peak of the control tower, wanting everyone surrounding to be able to hear. And yet how deplorable that her voice had no way of reaching everyone's eardrums. The problem was not merely one of volume. There was an issue of distance. The hearts of her audience were troubled. No matter how hard Liliana tried, the existence of physical and mental barriers was an undeniable reality. Liliana believed in the power of song. However, only devotedly spreading melody could be considered to become a true song. Spread every which way, just how many people had been overcome by unease and sorrow? Perhaps there were hundreds, even thousands. Liliana had never had the experience of reaching such a wide audience without the aid of the magical device. Whether a means of diffusing sound, or a means of spreading such sound simultaneously, a normal person would not be able to find it. Liliana's battle was too hopeless, her aspiration too distant. The Liliana who had once been 10 years old, had been considered by her wicked parents to be too reckless. And right now, was it just as back then, still repeating the same things? The power of song was real, so was the her transferring it the fake? At such doubt, her throat faltered helplessly. At that moment, Liliana, lovely songstress. With that singing voice, I want to keep you by side forever. A silly man with silly sophistry lingered in Liliana's mind. An odd man. Doubtlessly strange. Perverted might be more accurate. Upon hearing Liliana's song, those who had been touched by malice yet remained. Liliana remained distant from it all. Something untrue to song, an attempt at wholeheartedness that could not be lent to others. That was the dedication of a bard. I fell in love with your beauty. Please stay by my side. And so, he was the first to try to become close to her from his heart. Awareness that Liliana was a bard was something that came after his declaration of love to her upon seeing her. When she had first performed in front of him, rather than her song, his eyes raked over her face, chest, feet, honestly rather uncomfortably. However, that wasn't to say that he didn't find himself touched by Liliana's song. And his feelings toward Liliana weren't covered with a layer of dishonesty. Showing attraction to her appearing and understanding of her song, knowing that as a person leaving was impossible. The city of Pristella has 4 large gates. So, within the city are a number of shelters as an emergency measure. This purpose of this magic device is so that citizens will be more aware of their safety on a day-to-day basis, and in the event of an emergency be prepared. What's what for? Let's try playing Liliana's song through that radio. Within this city are many people who have yet to understand your song, this is the perfect chance. Song amplified by the magical device was for Liliana a shortcut. A song should indeed be sung before an audience. Liliana had grudgingly refused. But he only laughed heedlessly. I want to monopolize your figure. However, your song absolutely cannot become something restrained. Songstress to everyone else, Liliana to me. Is that something that can't be? The weirdo had in fact laughed with such wicked intent. If he wanted to convince her like this, she wanted to snort. Liliana knew that many love stories of this world had been chronicled. In those love stories, their hearts swayed, became infatuated with love. He knew her. Knew which words would be charming, which attitudes were exciting. And thus, Liliana would not be fall lightly for such words. Perhaps they weren't sweet, but they appreciated the voice of the songstress. So exaggerated, that she couldn't straighten her chest, and say it suited her. Because he had always been looking forward for Liliana to become the songstress. Because that person had turned her into the songstress of this city. To communicate, reverberate, tremble, this longing. No matter how dark the night, so pitch black that seeing forward was impossible. Even then, morning would still arrive, as always. More resolute than anyone, believing in it more than any way to sing for it. Songstress of the Watergate city of Pristella, Liliana Masquerade. From that sort of feeling, no pain could be gleaned. Everything of herself, all began from the wrists that strummed the lute lyre, feet that danced in synchronicity, throat that sang without rest, immersed only in this feeling. Singing, Liliana had not noticed. The lament of those whose spirits had been controlled no longer echoed by her ears. On the opposite side of the flaming waterways, those who had been sighing in lament gazed upward toward the empty sky. No, not empty. A sound was audible from the control tower wreathed in flame. A miniature figure from the peak continued to cry out from a great distance. Eyes that could not leave her. Focus directed completely toward the ears, everyone held their breath to listen in rapt attention. A song that should not have been heard was heard clearly by everyone. This was no miracle, nor was it a simultaneous hallucination. Nor was it the Archbishop's power, indeed there was no shared emotion at all. A gift Liliana had been granted by the heavens, the true blooming of the divine protection of telepathy. A divine protection that had until now been subconscious, only when it reached this moment could it exert the influence it was supposed to. Between her ability as a singer, and the realization of casting everything aside in this hopeless moment to help, she had become a tremendous force, flowing into the city. Of course, Liliana was unaware of this. In addition, there was no one there to inform her of what the situation was. Liliana only sang with all her heart and soul. Becoming a bard, putting her all into singing, turning everything over to this instant. Echoing here was the voice of Pristella's songstress. Priscilla, as expected, the arrangement myself had prepared came to pass. Within was a flaming crimson sword, and Priscilla who held that sun laughed out loud. The song had also reached Priscilla's ears. Liliana had taken center stage on the burning control, producing the most brilliant of songs. Although the flame was under the young blade's control, the heat emitted by it was no fake. The heat of the control was at a critical level, and the stone tower would feel scorching. Even at this instant, certainly, it was so hot that she would want to leap off. Even so, from this song that transmitted all of Liliana's feelings, cries, or complaints of pain were practically undetectable. It wasn't that the feelings weren't there. Rather, undiluted pain had attained the purity of song. What a foolish conclusion. One which only a fool could reach, the height of a fool. The zenith of a brilliant fool that could yield a result which transcended reason. Priscilla, that one's idiocy is truly fascinating. Foolish is as foolishness. A fool does not deserve a life, but a fool has a unique joy. And even more, she has demonstrated a worth beyond joy. Thus, she deserves mine reward. Before allowing Priscilla to finish her soliloquy, from overhead and from the left burning chains pressed close. The snake's jaw bore a flame, moving directing to target Priscilla's steps. The pinnacle of unsightliness, Priscilla snorted. Raising the young blade, the crimson blade flashed from aslant. From above, from the left, simultaneous orbiting of the approaching chains were forcibly severed. The crisp sound seemed to ring twice simultaneously, and the freak growled wickedly at the sparks. Serious, both you and that girl are so damn annoying. What's so different about me and her? The methods are different but the core is the same. It just goes to show that it's reason. Sirius shrieked loudly, drawing the burnt-off chains close. Twisting her arms, angrily generating fire, the eyes of the freak whose black cloak swayed violently, pointed directly at Liliana dancing atop the burning control tower. Liliana's divine protection of telepathy was incredibly powerful, enough that it could affect the freak's perception. To the freak who was so perceptive to changes in the emotions of others, the effects of that song radiated without limit. The citizens had been freed from the wrath that had taken root inside their hearts. On the other side of the waterway still burning with white flame, within the eyes of the people who stood there were no traces of frenzy. What filled their eyes was not fervor but the gentle fall of tears. It was unclear from which emotion the tears stemmed, and the freak was incapable of taking up the formless feeling. Because rather than condensing into one feeling, it kept swaying. Serious, that person, as long as that person is, it can be proven. Why are you appearing before me to intercept my path? Humans want to pursue, to become one indeed. The world continues on this way. And yet, Priscilla, as is the nature of song, the accompanying feelings vary. Classic songs are charming, and each description of lovely differs. Crying out about the noisy feelings, but such a shallow understanding of what is most vital, this is what is referred to as foolish. Serious, that's enough already. Sirius widened her eyes at Priscilla's merciless speech, and with a howl, her arms folded. The colliding palms rattled the chains, and each arm violently unraveling the curled chains. Skin on arms peeling, flesh being scraped, acting as if she were in pain, Sirius spread her arms, forcefully swinging the split chains. The flame revolves around the orbit of the swinging chains, swelling to where the vortex reached the peak of its arc. The scorching flame became a round disc, burning in the wake of Sirius's heat. Priscilla, could it be that the bandages are for such wounds? The bandages were for burn wounds. If the reason was as what had just been witnessed, then truly it was mere foolishness. Faced with this greatest force, this greatest danger, Priscilla's did not waver. Two snakes of flame merged into their powerful flame. Priscilla gazed upon the vortex of flame with an expression of listlessness. Serious, the trembling of feelings, consuming emotions, this intensity, this wrath. Inspiring disgust, feelings of disgust, turned Sirius's flames into waves of heat. The flame spun as it approached. It had stopped being a metal chain. In the instant that the flame had blossomed, the role of the implements as chains had come to an end. The chain that done its job vanished in a flash, and only fire flew at Priscilla. A massive heat as if enveloping the entire world, practically a cloud fallen from the sky, attacks without pause. Utterly impossible to dodge, the only defense was to be swallowed thus. As for the flame itself, there was only one option. Priscilla, should mine decree be the decree of heaven, the light of the young blade will follow as one. Faced with the wave of flame pressing close, Priscilla lifted the young blade. Not as if feeling uncomfortable with the situation, merely raising the blade high. Sirius, disappear. Priscilla. In the instant of the collision, Sirius spat venomous hatred at Priscilla. Priscilla did not regard her fury. The only sound that reached her was the song. The instant when heat wave should have consumed her body, the young blade changed. Previously, on a sword where all the jewels shone had with light, the shine suddenly vanished. Only crimson light and crimson blade remain in Priscilla's grip. It was thus that the sword without its light met the flame. Without the radiance of the jewels, the sword became one of ordinary steel, and thus was unable to repel the approaching flame. If there had been an onlooker at the moment, perhaps they would have reported thus. But the result was the precise opposite. Priscilla, utterly pointless. Priscilla, sweeping the young blade to the side, murmured. She should have been consumed by the flames and vanished. And yet, her existence had yet to vanish. Not only that, her body bore no traces of the heat wave's aftereffects, beautiful and constituted as always. Waves of fire renowned for their power were swept away without trace. almost as if the only young blade glinting with reclaimed light knew where the flames had gone. Priscilla, Grip tight on the young blade, Priscilla's expression shifted. Where once there had been a confident smile, now cheeks stiffened as she hastened her steps. Right in her line of sight was Sirius, sprinting quickly. The freak's violent sprint pulled her far from Priscilla, clearly having run without checking the result of the flame. Meaning that from the very start Sirius's target hadn't been Priscilla. Sirius, stop with that piercing song. The wrath I share with that person, don't arbitrarily deny it. Eyes bloodied, Sirius rushed straight toward the control tower where Liliana sang. The white flame surrounding the control tower was a flame which would allow Liliana to be free. When Sirius rushed in, she would surely be burnt by the fire. Something of this degree, even the freak would understand. Then, the target was Priscilla, reprobate, forcing myself to. Propelled with momentum, Priscilla's form tore through the courtyard. Although Sirius was fast indeed, Priscilla was superior. Sirius's initial advantage gone to waste, Priscilla swung the young blade at the freak. Even if she had wanted to, the freak no longer had a means to defend. Without the chains on her arms, she had no way to meet Priscilla's sword. Priscilla, stop, commoner. Sirius, so annoying, just stop already. Priscilla, Before the young sword could slash at Sirius, Priscilla's body had stilled in midair. Her entire body frozen as if forcibly fixed in place, Priscilla's throat was caught by a sudden force. Sirius lifted her legs, and from the hem of her pants came the sound of the chain that was so familiar in this battle. Priscilla, tch. Rather than the arm, a strike from the chain wrapped around her legs had struck Priscilla and frozen her in her tracks. An attack after her entire body had been frozen in place was impossible to defend against. Accompanying the ferocious attack from the chain several times faster than the one from the arm, Priscilla's dignified face burst from the front. The sound of steel on flesh rang out, and Priscilla's bound orange hair came loose, beautiful hair scattering. Her face was left unmarred. However, her pride had been wounded. Although the power of the chain had been reduced, Sirius had pulled further away. During this time, Sirius had approached the control tower, using movements outside natural boundaries to shift her strength and body weight to the chain, and then released strength from her entire body. The serpent of flame swept the control tower with a violent momentum, and the foundation of stone tower collapsed with a howl. Fragmenting, collapsing, the stone tower's foundation was consumed by waves of fire, tilting from the impact of the huge flame. Liliana was in that stone tower. In one motion, the stone tower tilted and collapsed. Priscilla, with orange hair scattered across her shoulders, watched the tower collapse with widened eyes. Sirius's silhouette was visible. But atop the tilting tower, Liliana's silhouette was absent. And yet, Liliana's song continued. Even if the ground collapsed, even if she had been caught up in the destruction, Liliana fulfilled her duties, continuing to offer the people's hearts comfort. Priscilla, your devotion is for a great cause. And so, Priscilla strode toward Sirius without hesitation. If Liliana's voice were interrupted, sway over the people's hearts would return to Sirius. Making a split-second decision, the young blade shone, and Priscilla split the ground with one kick. Sirius, merciless egoist. Don't empathize using such arrogance. You who have no connections with people are defective. Mutual understanding, merging is the natural state of humans. Sirius, who had destroyed the control tower, was caught in Priscilla's anger. The chain jumped, rearing head knocked back. Rushing, the moving flames created a burst, reaching explosively for Priscilla's body and bounding her backward. A pause, and then continued steps. Bathed in the heat, Priscilla's eyes were unwavering. The same could be said of Sirius's frenzy. The freak could no longer hear any other voice. It would end here. Of the two who mixed like fire and water, there could only be one. The tilting control tower made a splitting noise, broken stones scattered, smoke curled and flames scattered, and the courtyard became a flaming hellscape. Those standing at the waterway where the tower had fallen, shrieked with tears in their eyes as they fled. But not tears of sorrow. For something else. For the sound of song. Sirius, love is as one. No tolerantly accepting love allows for differences. For everyone to the same person, feel the same way, share the same feelings, if what is nauseating and disgusting. She bent down to sweep aside the chain, leaning to meet the rushing attack. The distances shrank, and the sound-striking chain rang. The sound of steel colliding with steel was swallowed by the roar of the collapsing control tower. Priscilla's voice reached Sirius's ears. Priscilla, it's over. Sirius, did you think I wouldn't have known better? At the moment when Priscilla waved the young blade, Sirius opened his coat. Around the freak's waist were tightly bound chains like her hands and feet, and wrapped around her body by chains was a young girl with curled blonde hair. What Priscilla did not know was that her name was Tina. Since the beginning of this turmoil, she had been held hostage by Sirius. Although Subaru had mentioned her during the strategy about wrath, this matter had not been remembered by Priscilla. MMM. However, without hesitation, Priscilla swung the young blade at the hostage before her. The young blade did not hesitate in momentum and slanted toward Tina and toward Sirius's body. The sword's blade, renowned for its fearsome heat, soundlessly cut through the protective chains around her body, severed in half. Sirius, oh my. Priscilla, mind young blade can easily cleave through whatever it so chooses. The body of the bound girl was freed. The fallen girl lifted her face, which was stained with tears, meeting the touch of the sword that passed through her body. She could not help but collapse from surprise in the moment. But the result was, upon the body of the young girl, no cruel wound from a blade could be seen. Instead, Sirius was attacked and retreated. The freak looked down at her wound, and slowly shook her while looking back to Priscilla. Sirius, this agony, you. Priscilla, what cause is there to speak of your pain? Mine self cares nothing about becoming as one. As long as you die alone, you will always carry your prattle. Priscilla waved the sword again. With the startling sound and momentum, Sirius's body convulsed on the cobblestones, spilled fresh blood, was swept toward the waterway, and fell in. The sound of the water rang, and Priscilla looked at the young blade. Priscilla, is it finally over? It's too troublesome. After she spoke, the collapsing control tower fell apart completely. Most of it became rubble, and the rooftop where Liliana had been also felt the collapse, becoming rubble. From the collapsed control tower, of course, no song echoed. Looking at the pile of rubble, a youthful voice called toward the squinting Priscilla. Tina. Her expression was still one of disbelief, and Priscilla lowered her head, only to see Tina's eyes tremble, as tears began to drip down. Priscilla released a sigh. The young blade had already disappeared. As had white flame that lit the waterways, and many people were approaching. A few headed toward the collapsed rubble, searching for the buried songstress Liliana. Priscilla, on a night such as this, are only a group of noisy commoners. What should be a songstress's debut has nothing but the vulgarity of commoners. How tiresome. At a glance was the same listlessness as always, but some emotion peeked through that listlessness. Priscilla gazed at the sobbing Tina, then simultaneously at the waterway. Priscilla, but not bad. Have praises. Slowly flowing along with the water. A sore body, brimming with vitality, how to put it, a body covered in wounds. How can I say it, full of trauma? In other words, it was a feeling of being unable to even move. Completely out of energy to make any sound, even fingertips were unable to budge. Luckily, the outfit of a bard exposed much, with very little fabric, so even falling into a wouldn't spell weightiness from absorbing water, increasing odds of survival. But for the me of right now who had no energy to swim, just floating along was barely managed. Well, just floating along like this, sooner or later would mean growing cold, wouldn't that be quite troublesome? A voice from within cried out loudly. If I were to fall asleep like this, I'd die. No. I. Burning tower, aflame. Entire body in a state of being baked, at first falling into the waterway had been pleasantly cool, but now it was growing cold, and this is bad news. Speaking of which, the attitude of not escaping, but staying in the collapsing tower to sing until it fell in the water was probably more disastrous. Because it felt nice. To the point of thinking I'd lived for that moment. In fact, she had hoped for such a smooth development. It seemed that it was over, so as long as Priscilla-sama hadn't been killed, everything would probably go smoothly. That was nice. Right, well then. To be a bard. To be a bard, wishes that had to be attained, in a sense it could be said, that something that should have been realized had been. Perhaps the goal of leaving classical songs in history had not been met, but if everyone who had been there had been saved, to have been part of helping them, would be a nice thing to be brought up as a family dinner, to have left a favorable imprint in people's hearts, in this world was something small that I had been looking forward to. By the way, from just now a strange cry has been sounding, probably a signal that I'm still living in this world. There's a feeling that absolutely everything is about to feel exhausting. A voice, that's the proof of life. Faced with death, how am I managing to be so nonchalant? Although, it feels like it's about time for it to end. Although very much had, overall it was a happy life. Well, thank you for so far, thank you so much. Ow. My head hurts. What was that just now? Liliana? Head feeling as if violently struck, as if having collided with a boat floating on the waterway or something. Yeah, that's probably what it was. And coming from that boat was the familiar voice of a man. Liliana. So glad to see you again. But why are you in the waterway? No, we'll pull back first. Wait for me. Even though it was horribly painful, I was so shocked I forgot to cry out. Speaking of which, it seems Kiritaka-san picked me up. Alright, almost, alright, caught. Kiritaka-san stretched his heads to the water, pulling my floating form up. In that moment, his hand touched my best. But, there's no strength to be mad with right now. So it's fine. Being pulled onto the boat, I still couldn't move. Kiritaka, your body's become so cold. Wait for me, Liliana. I'll use a firestone. And I'll wipe you off. The you who I cherish can't be soaked. With a towel, he wiped my hair and face. His movements were unexpectedly gentle, almost gentlemanly. Suddenly a sense of relief rushed up. I released a breath, suddenly sighing. Liliana, Kiritaka, what have you been up to? Kiritaka, me, you mean me? Well, there was a lot, right, in order to retake the city. Pushing back that fringe he was proud of, perhaps his teeth were shining. Since I didn't have the strength to open my eyes, I couldn't see it, but it seemed to surface to my mind's eye. I couldn't help but laugh, which seemed to shock Kiritaka. I want to hear all sorts of Kiritaka-san's problems, and I have a few things I want to say to you. Right now I'm really sleepy, but I want to tell you. Liliana, I'm really sleepy from now on, I'm going to sleep. Kiritaka, alright. I'll take you somewhere safe, don't worry. Liliana, the sleeping me, if you don't do anything mean, then from now on, we'll talk afterward. Kiritaka, No, then maybe I'll say it first. But opening eyes would maybe, no, definitely some embarrassing words would be exchanged, that you be troublesome. To be your songstress is wonderful, preparing to say that much is fine. End of chapters 66 through 67, Liliana Masquerade.